Hey, Nick and Rick.
Hey, Tanya.
Rick, you may want to switch your screen.
Hi, everybody. We'll be with you in just a moment. Sorry. Okay, welcome everybody. Sorry for the brief delay. Please do let me know if you have any trouble seeing or hearing, okay? Just straightening out a few technical difficulties here, but we're raring to go. So welcome. Thank you all for joining us. This is our pre-application conference for the Ladders to Licensure program. And this will be your first but not last opportunity to learn about this new program, to ask questions, get answers, and hopefully prepare an application for this new grant program. So what we're going to do today is provide you with an overview of the program and talk to you in some detail about the application process, the objectives of the program, and how you can submit a successful application. Just to let you know that this session is being recorded, which will give you the opportunity, and others who aren't here, the opportunity to review the session in the future. There also will reemphasize this later, but there will be an opportunity to ask questions not only during this session, but after the session until September 27th in writing, and we will post responses to those questions on our website. Okay, so just quickly, the Ladders to Licensure program was initiated or came to be as a result of the stakeholder process that EOHHS has had the opportunity to co-facilitate over the last couple of years or so. The legislation was introduced at the request of our private sector partners, and through a great deal of advocacy, was successfully passed into law and received a budget allocation of $750,000. And that has enabled and charged EOHHS with the responsibility for developing this, this grant program. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about the program, and I will just start by noting, sorry, that Ladders to Licensure recognizes, or the legislature recognizes, and we certainly recognize, that there is a lot of great work happening in Rhode Island already around career ladders in the healthcare field. And Ladders to Licensure is looking to take that to the next level. The overall objective of Ladders to Licensure is to address workforce shortages by increasing the number and the diversity of health professionals working in Rhode Island. And to do that by increasing support for workers, particularly those who are not licensed, in paraprofessional roles, who are on a pathway or might be encouraged to embark on a pathway to higher education leading to health professional licensure. And specifically, the objective of Ladders to Licensure, the way to do Ladders to Licensure is looking to do that is by removing barriers that make it difficult for working adults to advance in their careers, by increasing opportunities for them to do so, and developing career ladders that have very clear rungs, very clear educational opportunities and requirements where workers can obtain credentials, additional compensation, additional responsibilities for as they move up the ladder. Now, also the intention of Ladders to Licensure is to encourage and incentivize employers to take more of a role and provide more support and flexibility to workers who are looking to increase their advance their careers, and likewise to encourage and support higher education institutions for doing so by being more flexible, more accommodating to non-traditional working adult students. And the way that Ladders to Licensure will do this is by funding partnerships between employers and higher education institutions and others. So supporting those partnerships, investing in ways to make higher education more affordable for working adults, paying for expenses that relate to individuals advancing on a career ladder, whether that's tuition or other ways to support workers, which we'll talk about. Making career ladders more understandable, more accessible, more consistent throughout the state, so that regardless of whether you're employed down the road, whether you work for one employer or another, or whether you're looking at one school or another, it will be clear how to progress from perhaps an entry-level job up through a licensed occupation. And in the course of doing that, we will identify system changes, not only in the workplace, not only in higher education, but also in the state, that can support and facilitate career advancement. So before we get any further, just to make sure we're all on the same page as to what we're talking about here on some terms that we're going to be using a lot. So career ladders, as it sounds, and as you probably know, means a system or a sequence of training and education opportunities in the classroom or on the job or in other forms, could be online, that provide individuals the opportunity to progress from one level of employment and education to a higher level. And in the case of this program, to advance towards obtaining a health professional license. The career ladder planning, which Ladders to Licensure will be supporting financially, refers to a process in which partners across industry, across education, and within the community come together to develop and strengthen career ladders for healthcare workers. Career ladder implementation is the actual implementation of a career ladder, where there are workers on a pathway who are taking training, who are in school, who are gaining on-the-job experience that may be recognized for academic credits or prepares them for their next job up the ladder. And the Ladders to Licensure program will also support those kinds of investments. You're also going to hear us talk about Rhode Island Reconnect Plus. You may be familiar already with the Rhode Island Reconnect program, which is run by the Office of the Post-Secondary Commissioner. The Reconnect program currently provides all sorts of supports for adults to return to college. Those supports are typically not tuition. They're sort of everything but tuition. They may be case management, coaching, and also wraparound services, which can include financial supports for things like childcare, transportation, and removing other barriers that may make it difficult for working adults to attend school. So that's the traditional Rhode Island Reconnect program. What Ladders to Licensure will do is bring additional funds to Rhode Island Reconnect to create what we're referring to as Reconnect Plus, which will enable individuals to also receive, through the Reconnect program, tuition assistance to offset the cost of higher education. By the way, I cannot see the chat or hands. So Ariana or Kristen, if you need to interrupt me, feel free. So there are, in the first year of this grant program, which is starting essentially now and will run through June 30th, but funding will not start until January 1st. There will be three components, three categories of funding. And I just sort of alluded to them. The first one is the career ladder planning. That's the partnership development and designing the components of career ladders. The second, and that's a required piece. That's one of the things the grant will fund. And if there's no career planning, there's no funding for the partnership. Second requirement for receiving funds is that there must be employees who are either currently engaged in higher education or prepared to start in higher education starting in January, in that spring semester, that first semester in January 2025, or in the summer sort of mini semesters that happen, and there's 2 of them. Any of those are okay because we can fund those with these funds, but that's a requirement. And we'll go into more detail about that. The third piece is optional, and that's specifically for partnerships that are already fully developed career ladders and are looking for support for those. And when we say fully developed, there are specific requirements outlined in the grant application document that explain, and we will go into more detail about that. It is our hope and expectation that Ladders to Licensure will be funded in subsequent years. And of course, the level of funding is not knowable. And so our projections are just based on a conservative projection that current funding continues. And that being the case, what we intend and hope to do is to continue to support partnerships that are developed and initiated through this first round of funding. In subsequent years, we do expect and aspire to continue to provide the Reconnect Plus tuition supports, and also to see those partnerships that began the planning process in this first year implement those career ladders with continued support from Ladders to Licensure. So a little bit about the partnerships. The required partners are there must be at least 3 employers, healthcare employers. They can be for-profit or not-for-profit. They each must have a unique employer identification number. So I mentioned that because they might be part of a system or some other entity, but as long as they have separate employer identification numbers, they are considered separate employers. There also must be a higher education partner as part of an eligible grant to be an eligible grantee. In addition, among the other types of partners that are both permissible and encouraged are trade associations, labor organizations or labor management organizations, career and technical programs, community-based programs, other types of training providers such as proprietary ones, philanthropic organizations. The grant document doesn't say this, but government agencies can also be a partner. Question came up earlier about HMOs or insurers who are interested in and committed to supporting workforce pathways could also be a partner. We say a bit about the partner roles, and I just, for those of you who may be familiar with the Department of Labor and Training's Real Jobs program, some of this is similar and reflective of their approach. So it may sound familiar to you in that case. So there are several roles. They don't necessarily need to be taken by several organizations. They can be done by one organization, or they can be shared, or they can be distributed amongst more than one. So first and foremost is the lead applicant. That is the organization that takes responsibility for doing all the paperwork, the reporting, the data collection, and so forth. It's kind of the administrative wing of the partnership. The convener is exactly that. The convener really facilitates all the program components, the program design, implementation, coordination, not on their own, but as a convener. So they are bringing the partners together to develop all those aspects of the Ladders to Licensure plan and implementation. It's important because of that role that they have credibility with all the employers and other partners in the partnership. That can be the same organization as the lead applicant, but it doesn't have to be. Similarly, with the fiscal agent, that could be the same as the lead applicant, but it doesn't need to be. The fiscal agent, as it sounds, is responsible for the receipt and disbursement and reporting of funds. As I mentioned, there have to be at least 3 employer partners. Happy to see many more than that in a partnership. There must be a total of at least 250 employees across the total number of employers. And by statute, the employer partners are required to contribute a 25% in-kind match and a 10% cash match. And we'll talk more about that as well. I mentioned already the requirement for there to be an education partner. That would be a higher education partner.
Rick, there was a question in the chat, which is probably a good time to mention this now, is this only for CCRI, Rick, and URI?
Okay, no, it is not. Any institution of higher education can be a partner in a partnership. Thanks for the question. So a bit about who is eligible to participate as in the career ladder pathway, or to receive the Rhode Island Reconnect plus tuition supports. The eligibility for Reconnect tuition supports is individuals who are in a paraprofessional and or unlicensed occupation. Okay, so individuals, with the exception of nursing assistants, who do have a license but are eligible to participate. Other licensed health professionals would not be eligible for tuition supports. So, for example, somebody who is a associate degree nurse who wants to become a bachelor's prepared nurse, very laudable, but not eligible for support in this program because it's specifically to support individuals to go from paraprofessional to a licensed role. They must be employed by an employer partner. Okay, so it can't be a future hire or a student. It must be somebody who works for the employer. They must have been employed in a health and human services setting for at least a year. Doesn't have to be with the employer that they work for currently. That could be the employer's policy, but for this program, they just have to have been employed in health and human service setting for at least a year. They have to be, as I mentioned before, either enrolled already in a higher education program or ready to enroll in a higher education program in the first semester of 2025 or the summer semester. And they have to be committed to staying in health and human services after they obtain their license. And that will be part of an agreement that they enter into with the Rhode Island Reconnect program. In terms of the support for planning and the general expectations, the career ladder planning needs to be focused on developing a pathway to a licensed occupation that requires higher education. So again, paraprofessional roles can be a starting point. They can be a rung on the ladder. They might not be the first rung on the ladder. They could be an intermediate rung on the ladder, but they can't be an endpoint on the ladder unless they require higher education and lead to and carry a health professional license. So here are some examples of targeted occupations, and also the occupations that might start out at the beginning of the ladder, or somewhere on the ladder, maybe not the beginning. So we're anticipating supporting a pathway related to nursing and a pathway related to behavioral health, but other pathways will be considered. In nursing, these are examples of occupations, so there are surely others, but common examples for a starting point would be a nursing assistant, personal care aide, medical assistant, etc. And the higher education programs in nursing would really be primarily licensed practical nurse and RN. And those, of course, correspond with the license of LPN and RN as well. Behavioral health is a little sort of more varied. There are any number of occupations that work in behavioral health, and including substance use disorders, among others, family and child services, many different roles in which a license in higher education degree might not, especially the two together, may not be required. And yet licensed professionals are very much in need. And so the intent here is to support individuals in a variety of unlicensed behavioral health occupations. We list them as starting occupations, but they do include case managers, to go on to obtain a higher education degree, depending where they're at, pursuing either an associate degree, bachelor's degree, or a master's degree, which primarily would be leading towards licenses in either social work, mental health counseling, or marriage and family therapy. Those are master's level programs, so there are some differences there in the nature of the pathways from the LPN and RN pathways. And as I said, we will also consider ladders in other settings or sectors or occupations besides nursing and behavioral health. Oral health is one that might come to mind, as long as there is a higher education pathway that leads to licensure, and there's a need for those workers.
Rick, it might be worth pausing for a minute. There's
Sure.
a bunch of questions.
Okay, good, thanks.
So the first one is around the LPN to RN track, and where that stands.
Where it stands.
Well, would it be eligible?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sorry. I that's a very good question, and should have clarified that. We will support pathways for LPNs. So that is not listed as a starting occupation. Perhaps it should be, and we can clarify that. We're going to, by the way, put additional information on the website. So please continue to check the website. You're going to see addenda to the application, as well as questions and answers. So we will clarify that so that there's no question that yes, an LPN, a program that would support LPNs to become RNs is permissible, eligible for funding.
Also, would a pharmacy tech be eligible because they're licensed, but they could become a career ladder be on a career ladder to a pharmacist?
Yes, that would be eligible. That's a good question. I mean, you have
Not
to.
as an endpoint, though. Not as an endpoint.
Not as an endpoint, as a starting point.
Yep. Yep.
Right, because Pharm Tech is not a higher education, does not require higher education. So absolutely, a partnership, an employer partnership, could identify pharm techs as candidates for a higher education degree and license and higher license. Yeah.
And that sets us up for the next question, which is for longer educational pathways, do the selected candidates have to complete their education and obtain licensure prior to the conclusion of the grant?
Well, we don't know how long that's going to be, either of those things. So no, the goal here is to create pathways. That's the ultimate goal. We also want to support individuals on those pathways, and we will support them for as long as we have funds to do so, and as long as they haven't gotten to the end point. So those two things are not knowable, but we intend to develop pathways that will make it possible for those individuals and others who come after them to progress along those ladders.
Okay. There's also a question about doula certification.
So doulas are, I'm not sure what the question is. If the question is about supporting folks to obtain doula certification, so that's not an endpoint in and of itself, again, because it doesn't require higher education. This program is very intentionally designed to support folks to pursue higher education and licensure. Doula could be a rung on a ladder. It would be up to the applicant to describe how that either could be also a starting occupation or it could be a rung on a ladder, but it will be up to the applicants to describe the next rungs on the ladder leading to higher education and a professional license.
All right, thank you. The other one is would a registered behavior technician to a BCBA, which I'm forgetting what that stands for, be considered? The registered behavior technician, I don't believe requires a degree or higher education. And I'm not sure about the BCBA, but I think it does.
I believe it does. And if I'm remembering correctly, then the answer would be yes.
Yeah. And then the other question is licensure required as an end? I'm assuming that means as an endpoint. What about a certification? Can a certification be an endpoint?
Not unless higher education is a requirement for that certification. So probably not.
Okay.
Unless somebody has an example that I can't think of.
And then the next one is so lateral career movements where people are just looking to expand their knowledge in their current field are not eligible, but if they're looking to advance their licensure, it is eligible. In other words, a PTA looking for certificates is not eligible, but a PTA to PT is eligible.
Correct.
Yes. And
right.
then
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to emphasize that this is not a professional development or a continuing education program in the sense of CEUs, CEs, that kind of thing. This is literally about going to the next rung on the ladder.
Although the one thing I would mention is that there can be micro rungs as long as they're attached to wage gains. So hypothetically, within an occupation along the ladder, not as an endpoint, but along the ladder, you could have like a CNA 1, a CNA 2, a CNA 3 with wage gains associated with it, where the expansion of skills and knowledge is within the context of the CNA role.
Yeah, that's a really important point. So it's not that every rung on the ladder, that only those rungs that, on the ladder that lead to licensure have to lead to licensure. No, there can be rungs on the ladder that don't involve licensure. They don't necessarily even involve a different job title, but they do have to show progression. And we'll get into the specifics about what we mean by career ladder readiness. So as long as the ladder has an endpoint that the partnership is working on to make it feasible for folks to advance to that endpoint of degree and license, then yeah, interim steps on the ladder are certainly encouraged.
The next comment is it's more of a confirmation that this is incumbent worker training focused.
Absolutely. This is incumbent worker training focused and solely. This is not about pre-employment training.
And then lastly, it says many people with higher ed degrees are case managers without certification. They currently learn on the job. Can a case management certification qualify to add on to the resume?
I guess I'll just not sure if I'm responding to the question, but again, case manager, while it's in some cases higher education degree is required, it's not a licensed occupation, and it's not an endpoint. So a ladder or a partnership that proposes to have a ladder that includes case managers would have to show a plan for how those case managers are going to advance to obtain a degree that is required for licensure.
And then there's another comment in the chat posing an example of nursing going for wound certification programs. And there's no question, but I'm assuming the question is, would that be eligible?
Yeah, again, because that's not a new license. And in fact, you're starting out with a licensed person, and so that would not be eligible.
And that's the end of the comments in the chat so far. Are there any other questions?
Hearing none, should I continue?
Yeah, I think so.
I really can't see the, okay. So just going to share a little bit more now about these three components of the grant in year one. Starting with Rhode Island Reconnect tuition supports, Reconnect Plus. Sorry. So,
Rick, do you want to just mention what the page numbers are at the top?
sure. Oh, I see. Yeah, in general, yes, there's a page on the top of each of these slides. These page numbers correspond with the page in the grant application. Okay, so if you haven't, and maybe we want to put the link to the grant application in the chat for anybody who doesn't have it, but these page numbers correspond with the much more detailed information in the grant application. So it's very important to the Ladders to Licensure program to have actual individuals supported in this first year of the program, even though the longer term career ladder development will be ongoing. So in this first year, we are looking to support individual employees of the employers who form the different partnerships. And therefore, based on the number of total employees in a partnership, there's a requirement that a certain minimum number of employees be enrolled in higher education or intend to become enrolled in 2025, in the first half of 2025. You can see on the slide, based on the size of the partnership, the number increases. In all cases, there will be funds allocated per semester per employee on behalf of that partnership. So we're going to explain more how that will work. But if partnership A has 600 employees, they have to have a minimum of 10 employees across that partnership who are prepared to or already are in a higher education program, and they will receive the $5,000 per person to support those 10 employees or more
They
if
don't,
they have.
yeah, we might not want to say receive because they're not actually, the
Yeah,
partnership's not receiving the money.
Yeah, so I'll just preview this a little bit. So the funds will be made available to the Rhode Island Reconnect program and will be sort of held for that employer partnership to draw down on at an average of $5,000 per employee who's enrolled in higher education. If some employees don't need the full $5,000 and others need more than that, then the Reconnect program will allocate those funds accordingly. So the employers won't be handling those dollars. You won't be writing any checks to schools. For that matter, you won't be writing any checks to employees either. We'll explain that in a couple of minutes. But so that's the way this will work. It will be essentially a fund earmarked for your partnership based on the number of employees that you've identified as pursuing higher education and licensure. Okay. A little bit more about this component of the grant. As we in order to establish that you have that you expect to have 5 or 10 or however many employees, we are strongly recommending that partnerships do a survey of their employees so that you're not just pulling a number out of the air, but that you have and are able to substantiate in your grant application the number of individuals who have either already enrolled or expressed an interest in enrolling, and you'll be asked to tell us, what their occupation is, and what their career path of interest is. I think I've already described this, that they have to enroll either in the first semester of 2025 or in either of the 2 mini semesters in the summer. I mentioned earlier that the Reconnect program in general provides other supports, the case management, the career advisement, academic advising, and some wraparound services or supports that include dollars for things like childcare and transportation and so forth, barriers to successful completion of higher education. Those funds are in addition to Ladders to Licensure funds. Reconnect program is separately funded to provide that. In your application, you're not applying, you don't need to apply for those funds, but they will come as part of being accepted as a Ladders to Licensure partnership. So here's how the tuition support will work. The Rhode Island Reconnect program, which we sometimes refer to as OPC, or the Office of the Post-Secondary Commissioner, as they work with your employees or employees who are in this program, the first thing they do is determine whether you're eligible, whether those employees are eligible for any grants or scholarships, any financial support. The second thing they will do is calculate the employer's tuition benefit. So as part of the application process, the partnerships will be required to submit the tuition assistance benefits, if any, of the employer partners in the partnership. And that will be calculated into the available funds for tuition for the individuals in the Ladders to Licensure program. Any additional costs, which can be significant, will be then borne by the Rhode Island Reconnect Plus funds, which are Ladders to Licensure funds. Okay, I do want to note that it may be that there are employers that don't have a tuition assistance policy. And if that's the case, the employer does have the option of contributing in a different way. And specifically, that way is by providing paid release time for education for the employee to attend classes or study equal to a half an hour for every credit hour per week. So if it's a 3-credit course, that would be an hour and a half of release time per week. I think I maybe said this, that the tuition funds will be paid by the employer partners to the Office of the Post-Secondary Commissioner. Perhaps I didn't say that. And then the OPC will pay the education providers on behalf of the participants. One of the advantages that this gives us, by the way, is that there may be opportunities to develop cohorts and negotiate tuition discounts potentially, or scheduling that is unique to the partnership and beneficial to the employees in the partnership. That will be part of the role of the Office of the Post-Secondary Commissioner to help facilitate the scheduling, as well as the role of the partnership itself. The partnerships that are funded will have a separate memorandum of agreement with the Office of the Post-Secondary Commissioner that will describe this funding arrangement in more detail. The question was raised earlier about public higher education institutions, and the answer was that all higher education institutions are eligible to participate in this. But it is important to note that the dollars are limited, and we certainly encourage partnerships to be mindful of that because the funds are finite. I mentioned that the Reconnect program provides non-tuition supports. This is just a little bit more detail on that. I don't really need to belabor it, but again, case management, coaching, and other supportive services that are provided by Reconnect and will be provided to your employees who are in this program, to employees who are in this program at no additional cost to the grant or the partnership. And with that, I don't know if there's more questions in the chat, but if not, Kristen, I'm going to turn it over to you here.
Yes, and I just want to pause before I go to the next part, which is career ladders planning, to see if there are any questions on Rhode Island Reconnect Plus. There wasn't anything in the chat, but I want to open it up. We do have one. Is there a cap on the amount available based on employer partners and employees? I'm assuming that
There,
means like
oh, I
maximum.
see. No, there is not a maximum. I mean, other than we'll have to sort of evaluate the total requests and the total proposals, but there's not a maximum. There's only a minimum.
And then before I begin, there is a little bit of a background noise. So Rick, I don't know if you or Ariana have controls to make sure everybody's muted.
I'll look into that while you're.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next slide. So the next section of this is another, the second required application requirement, which is participating in a planning process. And the a couple of the requirements around this are, as we mentioned before, the identification of 3 or more employers who have a combined total number of employees across the partnership of 250. And then other partners, including at least one higher education partner that are agreeing via an MOU or a memorandum of agreement to collaborate on a planning process to develop a career ladder and that addresses a common workforce need that the partners have in the partnership. Um, in the application, we're looking for that partnership to demonstrate that collectively they have the experience and capacity and expertise to do this, that they also have the need for the occupational focus that they've decided they're going to be planning around, um, and that they've agreed to work together and design a common career ladder that focuses on at least one of the targeted endpoint licenses that's outlined in the application. Next slide, Rick. Part of this application to get planning funds will be a big part of this will be about the memorandums of agreements that the partnership puts together that formally confirms what you're trying to do together, and the career ladder that you intend to design, and the commitment of each partner to be a part of that process, participate in a learning collaborative, which I'll talk about in a minute, and also that there are explicit agreements related to meeting the cash match requirements and the in-kind requirements from employers. And that's specific to the legislation that the doesn't mean that there can't be more matching from other partners, but the minimum requirement is a cash match from employers of 10% each, and an in-kind match from employers at 25% each. And we'll talk a little bit later about what qualifies as the in-kind and the cash match. Part of the application here will also be providing a budget and budget narrative for the planning period or the grant period of performance, which can be anywhere. The planning period itself, the grant period of performance is January to June 2025. The planning can be anywhere from 3 to 6 months, depending on what the partnership feels that they need. And in a minute, I'll talk about what the outcome of that process will be. And then as part of the application for this part, we would be looking for a work plan that outlines the activities that would happen during the planning process during the next 6 months of 2020, or the first 6 months of 2025. One thing I want to just clarify, because I think this could be easily confusing in the application, is that the planning process is the time during which the partners will have time to come together and do the detailed career ladder design. So as you apply for this planning money, what you're essentially saying is we have 3 employers, we meet the requirement. Collectively, we've got the experience that we need. We have a shared workforce challenge we're trying to address. We've agreed to come together and plan around that, and we're going to design a career ladder that we all agree is going to meet the follow, a series of requirements when we design it at the end of the day, and we are going to support that process through a series of commitments that we are spelling out in a memorandum of agreement, and we've put a budget around it and a work plan around it. So at this point, the planning is about planning. But at the end of the planning process, once you've become a grantee and you are participating in the learning process, you're learning collaborative, and you're going through your planning process, the idea is that you're working towards a detailed career design that meets some specific requirements. And I'm going to go over those in a minute. They're also on page 14 of the application. And this design that will be an outcome of the planning process will be a basis for subsequent funding requests. I'm just stopping for a second to see if there's anything in the chat. Does an employer partner have to apply for the grant, or does the institution of higher ed on the lead on the grant? That I would encourage you to go back and review the page that's specific to eligible partners, but also the various roles in the application. So there's a lead. There are no requirements in terms of who does what in which and fulfills which of these roles. There are a limited number of organizations that can apply as the lead applicant. So there's a broader list of potential people or entities that can partner as part of the application. There's a shorter list of lead applicants. And Rick, could we go back to slide 10 just so that there's a visual here as I talk about it? Almost there. There we go. So you can see on the right side that lead applicants can be an industry or trade association, a labor management organization or a labor organization, an employer, an institution of higher education, or a CBO nonprofit organization. The convener may or may not be the same as the lead applicant. That could be a different partner, and there's no requirement on which partner needs to play that role. And the same thing with the fiscal agent. They may or may not be the same as the lead applicant, but there's no requirement that a particular partner need to play that role. The only so the lead applicant has some parameters around it, and the requirement of 3 employer partners with at least 250 total employees combined across the employer partners is the other requirement, and that there also has to be at least 1 higher education partner. Okay.
Kristen, just one more thing, just to add, it's a little more in the weeds, but for the employer partners, they cannot be government agencies. They can be a part of the partnership, but they cannot be employers.
Right. Thank you for that clarification, Ariana. That's a good point. So I'm just looking, so is the MOA with the post-secondary commissioner's office or the higher ed institution and 3 partners? So the memorandum, so the agreement, the partnership agreement. Okay, I think I know what you're asking. The
I
MO,
can
there's,
put it, I can, if it's
okay.
helpful, I could just put an answer in the chat, maybe.
Okay.
Or,
I'll address it, and then you could
Oh, go
also
ahead.
put
Yeah,
it in
sure.
the application.
Mhm.
There's when you get the grant, there'll be a contract. And the contract that gets put in place will be between the lead applicant and EOHHS and also OPC. So that's a little different than the memorandum of agreement that I'm talking about in these slides. Amongst the partners in the partnership, there will need to be an MOA between the lead applicant who is serving as the representative of the partnership and all of the partners in the partnership, spelling out the agreements of their relationship. So when you see the word MOA in the slides, that's specific to the agreements between partners. Okay. And then I'm looking here. Can the career ladder focus on more than one licensure or just focus on one specifically, like CNA to RN or COTA to OTR? There is actually a enhanced, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but there can be some enhanced consideration for career ladders that have more than one major rung. So it does not, there's no limit in there as it's articulated in the application that there can only be one licensed endpoint. Okay. All right. So back to where I was before, was talking about career ladder design requirements. So this is the next couple of slides um, are going to address the requirements of the career ladder design that will be developed via the planning process. But this is also relevant because if you are thinking about applying for career ladder implementation funds, you can do so if you already have a design that meets all of these design requirements. But that is an optional part of the application. So these are relevant in two ways. One is to know what you're committing to design, and the second is if you are going to ask for money now to support to implement it, it needs to meet these requirements. So the first set is in order to, a design, and some of these are going to be pretty obvious and basic, but um, you need to be able to specify the core competencies and expectations for each rung and kind of what the interconnected educational increments are and the micro or macro credentials for each rung. So as we mentioned a little earlier, when we say micro, I don't know if there's like an official definition of micro, but those that, that can be, if you're going, like I gave the example before, if you're going from CNA to RN, you could have a CNA 1, 2, and 3 with some micro credentials attached to that, um, leading towards, I'm making this up. This is not what we're saying we want for sure. Yeah, we're just, I think the logical thing would be to LPN and then possibly to RN after that. So, so you can have micro, the smaller things, and also kind of larger, well-defined macro level credentials for the various rungs of the ladder. We're also looking for a design that utilizes um, education and training partners to provide training and education that is using, and this is the important part of this statement, flexible scheduling and delivery methods. We're looking for career ladders that offer academic credit for completion of some or all of the education attached to the ladder. I think if there's higher education involved, that would come with credit, but there may be other types of training and education built into the ladder that may not have academic credit, but the goal would be to maximize academic credit for completion of the various steps along the ladder. Next slide. We're looking for partners to, and particularly employer partners, to commit to providing an incremental standardized wage increase for each level attained once the career ladder is implemented. So this is, if you're not asking for implementation dollars in this first grant period of January 2025 to June 2025, this is an aspiration that you articulate and a commitment that you articulate in the MOA that you intend to do this when the career ladder is implemented, and that every partner recognizes that they've made that commitment. But you're not actually doing that during this first 6-month grant period. Providing flexible or reduced work schedules that allow the employer to participate during regular work hours. Meeting the requirements around tuition assistance. So Rick mentioned that around leveraging employee tuition assistance benefits according to your existing employer policy to offset tuition costs prior to Rhode Island Reconnect Plus dollars being applied. We're looking for partnerships that intend to design a career ladder that thinks about how to sustain support for education and training and related costs so that workers that are not receiving or who are lower income workers who may have pressing financial barriers that prevent them from pursuing higher education can do that, whether that's looking at paying for tuition up front, and we're kind of revising policies to allow for that possibility or other strategies. So that's one design requirement. The other is that the ladder be portable so that amongst the partners. So if you have an employee that that is moving between employers, their level of achievement on the ladder in a prior work setting is acknowledged. And whatever wage scale the employer has developed to acknowledge the career ladder levels is applied to their salary or their wage. So I do want
Kristen,
to clarify. Go ahead.
yeah, you may be about to say what
I'm about to clarify that I want to be clear that when we say an incremental standardized wage increase for each level, that we're not expecting employer partnerships to establish a common wage scale, but rather that each partner, each employer partner would be committing to provide a wage increase of their own determination for attainment of each rung of that ladder. Is that what you were going to clarify, Rick?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
As I was speaking, it became clear that I wasn't clear on that. And then where necessary, modify human resource practices to align with the operations of the career ladder. Um, that could get to, rethinking how tuition assistance policies are designed, for example. Next slide, please. Also looking for higher education partners to build career ladders with employer partners that lead to industry recognized credentials. I think that's pretty standard for career ladders. Modify programs if necessary to mirror the competency models that are relevant for the career ladder in order to meet whatever industry recognized or post-secondary credentials that you're targeting with the career ladder. Looking for opportunities to accelerate or contextualize or integrate education and training into on the job opportunities and do it in a way that's recognized by employer partners, offering academic credit for completion or some or all of the education. We talked about that one already. Offering ways that participants can progress at their own pace along a career pathways program. Providing career advising and academic support, such as tutoring support appropriate to the participants' needs, and then offering training programming during non-traditional hours or at the work site. Next slide, please. There's also a series of things that can give the partnership enhanced consideration. So these are essentially commitments that would be made and reflected in the MOA for the partnership, and also are asked about in the application itself. So there's an opportunity to kind of articulate in writing kind of what your intentions are around each of these. So one would be the intention to design a career ladder with more than one occupational tier. Another would be to implement an apprenticeship model or another earn and learn kind of model. Providing upfront tuition assistance in lieu of reimbursement. Demonstrating a plan to braid other funding streams. Having a plan for sustainability in general. Having a higher education partner who will provide credit for prior learning, credentials, or work experience. Obtaining direct financial or in-kind contributions from non-employer partners like tuition discounts, and having plans for adding additional occupations to the career ladder, which is kind of actually, I'm realizing, a little redundant to the first one. Those are one and the same, which is that, if you have more than one occupational tier or licensed endpoint, and then if you're an existing real jobs partnership, that also affords you enhanced consideration. So I see a couple of questions in the chat before I go on. Actually, one that you already addressed, Rick, and just a
there's
comment.
just a comment.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. All right. So the last category of potential grant funding is around career ladders implementation. So if your partnership already meets all of those design requirements and also includes multiple employers and meets all the requirements that we've talked about so far, you can, in addition to planning funds and accessing Rhode Island Reconnect Plus tuition supports for your employees, you can also request funds to implement your career ladder. And if you go to the next slide, Rick, I can talk a little bit about that. I want to note here that even for those folks that feel like they have a fully designed career ladder that is already a career ladder design that that meets the requirements that we have, as well as is embraced by at least your three employers. We are requiring that partnerships apply for a minimum of 3 months of planning. So if partnerships feel that they will have a fully designed career ladder within that 3 months of planning, or perhaps have already met that requirement, and maybe are using the planning period to further flush out details and agreements between employers, you can apply for implementation funds. Those implementation funds have to be used before the end of the grant period, so it's a very tight timeline. So that would be June 30th, 2025. I also want to note that the Rhode Island Reconnect tuition support and the Career Ladder implementation funds can be quote unquote braided together. So let's suppose you have a career ladder that you've got ready to go and you immediately want to enroll 10 people in it. And part of that career ladder is a couple of courses at an institute of higher education starting in summer session 1. Rhode Island Reconnect tuition support can be utilized to support the tuition for those folks enrolling in your career ladder. And then you can also request additional funds to support costs of implementation that you cannot fund in any other way. Rick, is there anything you would add to that before I move on?
I mean, an example of that might be to use grant funds to support paid release time or partially paid release time. I think we're going to talk about the limits on that, but that would be an example.
Correct. Okay. The next couple of slides are some examples just to bring it all together. But before I put those examples up, are there any questions about Career Ladder implementation? Okay, so we'll go to the example. So these examples are intended to kind of illustrate a couple of scenarios, certainly not the only scenarios that exist, but to illustrate a couple of different ways these requirements could be met collectively. So in this first example, it's a application that's submitted by a group of 6 small employers. Combined across them, they have 250 employees. The employers want to invest in a career ladder for their entry-level medical assistants to become LPNs, but they do not have the capacity to do so on their own. So they ask their industry association to be the fiscal agent, and they partner with an institution of higher ed to serve as the convener for the planning work. They conduct a survey. They find 5 paraprofessionals that are working amongst the employers that want to enroll in higher education starting in at different times. I'll talk about that in a minute. This is an important kind of distinction because in this first grant period, the folks that you engage to enroll in Rhode Island Reconnect Plus tuition support do not have to be tightly aligned with the career ladder that you are planning to design. So in this example, we said medical assistants to LPNs, but when they looked out and said who wants to use Rhode Island Reconnect Plus tuition support, they had 2 people who were already enrolled in an LPN program, and they also had 3, and in this case, they were enrolled in pursuing their RN license already, and 3 people who were not yet enrolled in higher education at all, 2 that wanted to be an LPN and 1 that wanted an associate's degree to become a case manager. So that is completely okay for this first grant application. So this particular partnership applied for 6 months of planning funds, and then they've asked for tuition support for 5 people. So next example, Rick. So example B is a large health system. So a large system with over 1,000 employees, with multiple employers across multiple settings, wanting to design a career ladder that advances entry-level medical assistants and nursing assistants through 3 nursing assistant and medical assistant tiers to become an LPN. They anticipate that participants will receive leave time for the education and training and pay increases after the completion of each level. So at the completion of the 3 tiers of medical assistant, nursing assistant tiers, as well as when they become an LPN. They eventually want the career ladder to extend to radiology and surgical tech positions, and then also registered nurses. They haven't designed that yet, but they have the goal of building the career ladder out that way. They have the beginnings of a design, but it needs a lot more work. But they have several, numerous employees that meet the criteria for Rhode Island Reconnect plus tuition support. So they're applying for 6 months of planning funds and tuition support for a cohort of 39 people. And then the last example,
All right.
so this is a group of 3 larger employees. They already have an apprenticeship model, or they are taking an associate degree level case manager to a licensed social worker, licensed independent clinical social worker, or an LMHC. It's been designed, has not been implemented. They want this. This is one employer amongst the 3 larger employers. They want to adapt it so that it works for all members of the partnership and possibly find some other employers that want to do it with them. And they want to start implementing that apprenticeship model right away because they have a full design, and they think they can enroll their first cohort before the end of the grant period. They identify 10 employees who meet the criteria. It's not on the slide, but also who also want to be a part of this particular apprenticeship model. So this is an example of how they might braid the tuition support funds and the implementation funds together. And they apply for 3 months of planning and then some funding to implement the apprenticeship program, including some of that money is tuition support for their cohort of 10 people. Okay. Any questions that I need to address, Rick?
Well, I'm going to share the one that Tracy Martin just put in. How long, and this is similar to the earlier question, how long does the learner have to complete the license? Says she writes, each person can take a different period of time to complete. And I just posted a response, just again, making clear that there's no requirement for how much time the employee will be allowed to complete their education and obtain their license, nor do we, because every employee will be different and funding in the future is not knowable. They just need to be on a pathway that is supported by the partnership.
Thank you. Okay, so we can talk about funding for rewards. So I think awards. So we've talked a lot about the fact that this is an initial request for January 2025 to June 2025. Um, the it will be a competitive process and it will be based on available funding. We anticipate funding at least 2 partnerships. And I want to stop by saying, kind of stress this next point, which is that partnerships can be fully formed and established even if there is not an immediate funding award. So, for example, if you come together as a partnership and you apply and you do not get the funding, you are still invited to participate in the Grantee Learning Collaborative and to work with EOHHS to refine your application, which would put you in a position to be eligible for grant funds in subsequent years. Any questions on that? Okay. Next slide. Um, So once the grants have been awarded, there'll be an agreement that they enter into. This is not the same thing as the MOA as I was describing before, but it's your contract agreement with EOHHS and also with OPC. And that will recognize the partnership for a period of 3 years with an option to renew for an additional 2 years. And so during that contract period of 3 years, the partnership can request additional funds each year to sustain implementation of or expand the career ladder. And that will be those decisions will be made based on a set of criteria, which include the partnership's performance against their measurable their objectives, the availability of funding, and the extent to which the implementation of the career ladder meets the design requirements. Next slide. So this next couple of slides is going to focus on what expenses are eligible. I will say that we will be issuing a clarification later today or tomorrow that we made some changes here to clarify um, and there were those changes are on these slides. But if you're really one of those people that's crosswalking the application to these slides, you'll see that there's some nuances that have been changed, some items that have been modified, and those will be issued and available to everybody. If you know, the changes will be made publicly available on EOHHS's website, and they're for the most part clarification, but but we wanted to just note that here, and I'll tell you which ones have where it's changed. So this first slide is about eligible expenses for career ladders planning. So eligible expenses are costs for consultant or staff time to lead and facilitate planning. The grant application originally just said costs for planning consultants. And we wanted to clarify that it is if you have a person, whether they be a consultant or a staff lead, who is leading and facilitating and therefore documenting and doing a lot of the heavy lift of convening people and documenting plans and writing this application, et cetera, the costs for that time, whether it be a consultant or staff, are eligible. However, costs for other staff who are participating as thought partners but not leading or facilitating is not. Eligible expenses additionally include costs of convening people, any reasonable project management costs. That kind of falls again into and maybe we should further clarify this, Rick, that first one, which is that if you're hiring a project manager or you have a staff person that is adding a significant project management responsibility above and beyond their current role, those costs would be allowed. And then if you're hiring a consultant for program design or a grant writer, those are also eligible. Next slide. For Rhode Island Reconnect Plus, what's different here is the deletion of the column around ineligible expenses. Essentially, the eligible expense here is last dollar tuition and fees. And based on the way that this is going to be implemented, it seemed confusing to have a column called ineligible expense, so we removed it. I just want to also remind you that the tuition funds will be paid by OPC directly to the educational providers on behalf of the participants, so no money will flow from EOHHS to the grantees around tuition support. Next slide, please. Okay, so for Career Ladders implementation, the eligible components are implementation management. So if you're hiring a consultant or you have a staff person tasked to lead and facilitate the planning and facilitation or policy development, it's kind of above and beyond the roles that they're currently playing, that is an eligible expense. Same thing as planning, that costs for other staff who are participating but not leading or facilitating is ineligible. There's also a bunch of different implementation expenses that you can apply for grant funding to cover if they cannot be funded with other public or private funding streams. One of those would be curriculum development costs. If you have new curriculum or you have to make curriculum adaptations to meet the needs of working adults. Um, Up to 50% of the cost of providing paid time off for education and training for participants. So that's up to a half hour for each credit hour per week, or for non-credit programs, 1 hour for every 2 hours of training time. Also up to 50% of the cost of providing stipends for participants, if that's a strategy you're using. And up to 50% of the cost of the precepting of clinical training or other work-based learning opportunities. An eligible expense would be wage increases for participants. Next slide. For the employer cash match, by legislation, the cash match has to happen, or has to be an employer cash match. So there are a variety of eligible expenses that would meet this requirement. One is any costs or out-of-pocket expenditures for consultants to lead and facilitate planning, project management, or grant writing pertaining to this application. Not any grant writing for any application. We probably should clarify that too, Rick. Curriculum development, if you're not requesting grant funds for it. The cost of providing paid time off for education and training for participants. So if the employer is providing that as a method for meeting the tuition assistance requirement because they don't have a tuition assistance benefits policy, that cost can be offset here. Up to 50% of the cost of providing stipends for participants, if that's a strategy you're using. Same thing for precepting clinical training, and also employer paid tuition reimbursement benefits or non-tuition supports, or employer sponsored scholarships. And also books and educational supplies are eligible. Wage increases are not eligible. And then lastly, for in-kind, it can be the cost for other staff. So, a couple of times I mentioned you can't ask for grant funds to cover other staff who are participating but not leading or facilitating, but that can be an in-kind cost. Subject matter expertise, same thing. And if you're applying for career ladder implementation funds, you can also cite costs of equipment and facilities for training and education as an in-kind cost, and up to 50% of the cost of precepting clinical training or other work-based learning opportunities. Any questions on expenses before we go to the timeline? Okay, so this is kind of a visual of the timeline. So we are right now at row number 3 in September, that black dot right there called Bidders Conference, or this should be probably application pre-conference is what that should say. There will be a period of time for applications to be developed between now and early November. We hope to very quickly, within 3 weeks, turn around an announcement around the grantees, and then proceed with contracting so that we are ready to go on January 1st. The Planning and Learning Collaborative would be starting in January. It would go through June, and at the end of June, there would be your year 2 plan, which is your career ladders design, and your application for subsequent funding should it be available. And then for Rhode Island Reconnect Plus, we would also hope that that would begin either January for folks that are already enrolled in higher ed, or if not, then the first summer session of 2025 or the second summer session of 2025. The idea would be that tuition could be paid prior to June 30th, 2025. Rick, do you have anything to add on the timeline?
Not on, I guess the only thing I would add on the timeline is a general comment that we know that this is first of all, a new program, and secondly, it's got a number of components. It's ambitious in some respects, and so we would really encourage you to get right on it. And that means, having conversations within your organization, having conversations with other organizations, and also asking us more questions. And I just want to, in general, make that clear that this is not your last chance to ask questions and get information. Um, I'll just also add, so we will post the slide deck from this session today. We will also post a recording of this session on our website, and we will receive questions through September 27th and post answers to those as we get them. Okay, so you won't have to wait till after the 27th. We'll post the responses after we get them. Questions have to be submitted in writing. One thing that we cannot do and won't do is have separate conversations or meetings individually. That's not allowed and it wouldn't be fair. So all questions need to be submitted in writing, and then everyone will have the benefit of seeing the question and the answer. And the other thing that I want to mention that we will post on our website, Kristen's alluded to this, is that there are some clarifications and tweaks that we will be making to the grant application. We will post a link to an addendum, or maybe a second addendum if need be. The initial application as it currently stands will not be taken down from the website. It'll be there, but these addendums will be posted to add further nuance or clarification. So please check back. Please, check the website periodically so that you're sure you've got the very latest information.
Okay, we have a few minutes for final questions. Anybody have any additional questions they would like to ask?
Go ahead, Tanya.
Thanks. I noticed the comment about, I asked a question about, are you limited to one project, and that higher ed partners can be part of more than one? One addition to that question is, can you have higher ed partners from different institutions partnering with employer partners as well?
Yes. Do you mean more? Yes. So more than one institute of higher
Yeah.
education in the same partnership? Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
MJ.
Hi, thank you. Can you talk a little bit more about how you envision the sort of the disbursement of the planning funds? Is it, aside from the tuition, does it go to the lead applicant and they disperse to the partners? Do we invoice EOHS? Are there indirects? As a grant, this would have to go through our Office of Strategic Projects. So I'm trying to see if it makes sense for, URI to be the lead partner, or if it would be better to be to a
Well,
partner.
there will be a fiscal intermediary, which may or may not be the lead applicant, and that's who would handle the funds and the invoicing and so forth. There may or may not be a need for those funds to be dispersed within the partnership. There may just be shared expenses that the partnership has identified as, supporting the planning process, which is probably likely, but not necessarily, I suppose. But that would be something that you would be describing in your application for funding. My answering, is there anything that I didn't answer?
I would just say, I think that
Yeah.
technically, while there's probably lots of possible iterations of it, the fiscal agent would be the recipient of the grant funds and would be responsible for dispersing them.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions?
Okay, well, if not, we really appreciate your time and your interest, and we look forward to your questions if you have more between now and the application deadline. And in particular, we look forward to receiving your proposals. So thank you all and good luck, and Hope you find this have found this a valuable meeting and a valuable process to develop the grant partnerships. And we'll see you all soon.
There we
And
go.
then there were 3.
I was like, I think you might have to kick some people out, but
Yeah, I was already looking for that tool.
so. All right,
What
what
do
do
you
you
think,
think?
Ariana?
It's good. Is there a way to stop this recording now so you don't have to edit it
Oh,
later?
good point. You know what? Let's get back on. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I just pressed stop recording.